Good evening, viewers. Welcome to Climate Youth News at COP. We bring you news from the 27th World Climate Change Conference in Egypt and provide you with the most important information of the day, the latest developments and voices from the field. We start with a first contribution on the topic of the day.
First of all, the UN has different agencies that tackle different issues to make the world a better place. And the body of the UN that tackles the climate change and intergovernmental negotiations on climate change is called the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. And that is the body that is responsible for organizing the conferences of parties and the intersessionals that happen in June, and then the conferences of parties where all the decision makers all around the world come together and decide on climate policies together happen during the end of the year every year. With that being said, I will let you know what a COP is in a nutshell, real quick. So a COP, there are several agenda items discussed in a COP. There are civil society engagement during COP as well. There are a lot of pavilions that you can visit and learn more about other stuff that you're interested in, or for example, wider sustainable development as well. There are both civil society pavilions, country pavilions, and great initiative pavilions as well. And there are a lot of side events happening. You can also organize side event whenever the side event application is out, for example. And as young people, we engage through different constituencies in this process and participate through different negotiations and raise our voices to make sure that our voices and the voices of the children and future generations are at the core of these decision-making tables when the decisions are being made on the climate crisis and the climate policies are being made, for example. And there are several agenda items under the UNFCCC that you can follow, which is action for climate empowerment, loss and damage, climate finance. I personally follow Global Start Day because it's really relevant to the national contributions, and we really need young people to be at the core of the national development contributions and its implementation, because young people are fighting at the forefront in their countries and they need to be having a better future to deserve that. So that being said, I think that this is all about COP and the UNFCCC in a nutshell. You can all join a conference of party under the UNFCCC through any accredited organization or your university as well. Ask around in your universities. Sometimes they are also accredited and registered organizations. And yeah, I think that this is about it.
After this brief overview, we can now dive deeper into the COP. The following article is on what happened today.
COP27 has officially started. For the next 2 weeks, world leaders, scientists, activists and other stakeholders gather in Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt, to make progress on the fight against the climate crisis. During the opening plenary, UN Secretary Guterres has reminded us of what is at stake. We are in the fight for our lives and we are losing it, facing the choice between cooperation or collective suicide. UNFCCC Secretary Steele warned against backsliding from the Glasgow commitments, particularly on phasing down coal and ending fossil fuel subsidies. This sentiment was echoed by many parties. Today marked the second day of the World Leaders Summit. In that context, Tuvalu became the second nation to call for a fossil fuel non-proliferation treaty by joining forces with fellow Pacific nation Vanuatu in calling for states to negotiate an international mechanism that would manage a fast and fair global transition away from coal, oil and gas. Meanwhile, the United Arab Emirates president, who will host next year's COP, confirms their plans to continue selling oil and gas as the world is in need of it. The Prime Minister of Barbados, Mia Mottley, delivered a statement on colonial consequences of the Industrial Revolution. We were the ones whose blood, sweat and tears financed the Industrial Revolution, she said. She also proposed a 10% tax on the profits of oil and gas producers that could raise around $37 billion for climate finance. Relating to adaptation, UN Secretary Guterres unveiled an action plan to achieve early warning for all over the next 5 years. The initiative targets $3.1 billion in adaptation investments, However, this is only a tiny fraction of the promised $40 billion in adaptation funding by 2025 agreed upon at COP26. Loss and damage on the agenda. What vulnerable countries, most affected communities, and global civil society have tirelessly pushed for is now decided. For the first time, the official agenda of COP27 includes an item 8F on matters relating to a funding arrangement responding to loss and damages, the devastating consequences of climate-induced weather events. However, experts highlight that it is just a bare minimum that needs to be followed by concrete action. The fact that agreement over the new item was only reached after 40 hours of informal consultation shows how controversial the negotiations are. In this vein, Germany pledged 170 million euros to the Global Shield Against Climate Risk, which aims at strengthening insurance and disaster protection finance. It will be cooperatively launched by the rich G7 countries and the V20 group, a group of climate-vulnerable states. The amount is very small compared to what is needed, but symbolically significant. Observer NGOs highlighted that the loss and damage finance needs to be grant-based and accessible. An insurance-based setup is only a part of the solution because it is not affordable to all and does not cover non-economic losses. Pakistan became the most recent example of why many countries are fighting for a loss and damage finance facility. It is responsible for less than 1% of the world's emissions, but is paying a heavy price. The Pakistani envoy, Nabil Munir, said, "Loss and damage is not charity, it's climate justice." A simple message that seems to be increasingly heard across the globe.
You see, that's really something else when you hear something like this directly from the ground. We want to continue with this and pass the microphone on to activists on the ground.
How is your city affected by climate change? Can I introduce myself a bit? Okay, so hi, my name is Fatma. I'm from Karachi, Pakistan. As a lot of people know, Pakistan is one of the countries that face a lot of climate emergency side effects this year with the floods. Roughly 33 million people were affected and $20 billion have been lost in the damages so far. I'm from Karachi. Karachi is an immigrant city. It was a fishing village turned city after partition in 1947. It's an immigrant city because all these communities from all over the subcontinent and Asia moved to Karachi post-partition, and it kind of became a home place for those people. And I've been raised in Karachi. I've lived in Karachi my whole life. I don't know a place without it. And Karachi is one of the cities that has been noted by the World Bank to be one of the hotspots for the climate emergency. And with it, after Cape Town, we are the next city to run out of water. And we already have existing issues in adaptation and mitigation when it comes to how our cities manage. So if I'm just talking about myself, if it rains for 15 minutes, the entire city is underwater. Cars do not run, schools get shut down. Food gets worse because they don't have the conditions to curb it, and food poverty and economic issues get even worse. Pakistan's also going through an economic crisis at the same time because of the climate emergency, and that directly goes and hits the economic hub of Pakistan, which is Karachi. Karachi has the level of industrialization that is present in Karachi is not present in other parts of the country, and that's why. And it's a 20 million person population city, and that's why there's a lot of lack of management on how to adapt and mitigate the climate loss. So it could be rising temperatures, it could be months of rainfall, it could be all of these effects that go directly and hit different parts of society. I, as a young person, schools get shut down. Laborers are affected by direct rising temperatures, and that creates an economic crisis in regards with inflation. I think also coming to what I'm doing here at COP is that I'm really here to represent cities and urban losses that continuously are affected by the climate emergency. And Pakistan is a country that is not in the top 99% of countries in the world that emit carbon emissions. We are in the bottom 1%, but we are the top 10 most affected countries by climate change. And the situation we've seen this year here, I have been preaching it and talking about it for years. And we finally saw what it looks like, $20 billion US lost. And that's why I think it's really important for me to represent my city, because a lot of times in the climate narrative, urban communities and urban losses are filtered out because they just get covered up with some cement and they're done with. And that's why I think it's very important for the global community to know that Karachi is like a country. It has as many people as most EU countries have, and that's why it's very important to know that it's just not a statistic, it's a place. There are people here, there are children here, and it's up to the global community to come together and help countries like Pakistan face those challenges. So yeah.
Thank you for this powerful and important perspective. We, as the Global North, bear the main responsibility for the climate crisis and should finally live up to it. That was our today's broadcast from the 27th World Climate Change Conference in Egypt. We hope you will take something away with you. Tune in again tomorrow when it's Climate Youth News at COP. We will now follow up with a live Q&A with our team on the ground, so stay tuned and ask your question.